I call David Shearer.
Speaker, I just want to take probably not a full call on this bill, but just to again reiterate that the Labor Party supports the bill. This bill is brought about because we have to pass some enabling legislation to enable this treaty to come into force. We don't get to see or have the purview of the treaty before it's signed, but we do have the ability to, in a sense, to debate the merits of the enacting legislation, enabling legislation to bring this into force. So the Korean Free Trade Agreement was a tough deal. It was very tough for our negotiators, and they did it over a period of about 5 years. And why was it so tough? Well, on the basis that Korea will benefit by $4 million from the tariffs that we impose on their trade to us, and we, on the other hand, will benefit in the order of $229 million on the other. Now, you've got to look at that and think, that's a pretty good deal. In any view of this, it is a pretty good deal. And if Korea is sitting there and saying, we're only getting $4 million and you're getting 229, obviously they're going to be bargaining pretty hard. So in a sense, I want to commend our negotiators because I think they did a good job. As the last speaker said, New Zealand exists from trade. We don't have a huge internal market like the United States. Trade is enormously important for us. Exports are enormously important for us. And enabling our exporters to get their goods into countries without having to tariffs imposed is obviously of great benefit to New Zealanders. Just imagine what $229 million effectively can get to and give to those industries that are going to be benefiting from that. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, and let's use the example of kiwi fruit. Right now, our kiwi fruit exporters are paying about 40% in tariffs to get into Korea. Our main competitor, Chile, is paying nothing because they already have a free trade agreement, a long-standing free trade agreement with Korea. Now, if you're competing against Chile with 0 tariffs and your price has been hiked up by 40%, you can see the difficulty and the amount of money that we're not making as a result of that competition. This free trade agreement will not only give us benefits immediately, but it will enable us to be able to get our products like kiwi fruit into this market and have them more widely sold at a reasonable price that Koreans are willing to pay, because our quality, and certainly in kiwi fruit, is better. And the same thing applies to beef, where the tariffs are 40%. To lamb, where the tariff is 22%, they all over time reduce to 0. So once again, sir, we get immediate benefit from those tariffs going down, but we have a lot longer standing ongoing benefits because we get to compete against the European Union, the United States and others who have no tariffs on their goods whatsoever. A good deal. There are some buts, though, sir, some exceptions. I don't think we did as well as we would have liked in the area of milk powder, in particular milk and dairy products, and possibly in deer exports as well, even though the deer exporters group came and saw us and they still favoured the deal that we've got in front of us. So there were some issues where we didn't get quite as much as we would like. But let's look at Korea in the whole. Korea is a country where we have a two-way trade of about $4 billion. It's not as important as Japan, but it's just below Japan. It's certainly more important than the UK, and it's a nation that is growing its wealth. In GDP figures, it's the country that is immediately behind us and catching up fast. I would expect their GDP per capita to surpass us in the coming years. So, sir, this is a country that we strategically should have an agreement with as well. So the other but that I'd like to have, and this is something that David Parker, my colleague, talked about at length in his submission, both in the first and the second readings, is that we have left ourselves open to the issue of not being able to legislate about foreign buyers coming in and buying residential property in New Zealand because of this free trade agreement. This free trade agreement enables Koreans to come in and trade freely residential property in New Zealand. Unlike Australia's free trade agreement with Korea, we did not close that particular door. That means we can't say no foreign buyers coming into New Zealand to do that. We might be able to do other things, but we certainly can't do that. And sadly, because there's a most favoured nation status clause in the free trade agreement, which means that if we extend a benefit to one country, other countries that we have done free trade agreements with as well also benefit from those benefits as well. That will also enable that to be opened up to some ASEAN countries and certainly to China. Now, Mr. Key said that was Labor's fault for signing the free trade agreement with China. Well, sir, that's absolute nonsense, because we actually closed the door with China, but we've left it open with Korea. So that is an issue. It was brought to our attention by Dr. Kafru from Auckland University, an expert in the field, and the government up to now at least hasn't provided a very good explanation of why that wasn't closed off, because it seems pretty blatant and pretty obvious to us. Sir, I just want to say a couple of other things about the free trade agreement. There was a discussion from both the New Zealand First and the Greens about free trade agreements. The Greens said that they supported free trade agreements. I've yet to see any free trade agreement where they have actually agreed to. The one we signed with China, our exports to China have gone from 3 billion to 10 billion in the space of about 6 years. That was signed by Phil Goff. It was carried on by this current government in the same spirit, and it meant that during the financial crisis, when the rest of the world was suffering badly, New Zealand, because of the increasing access that we had to the Chinese market, meant that our economy was actually pretty well safeguarded. If we didn't have that, we would have been in a much worse state than we certainly are today. So I am very pleased that we had the free trade agreement with China, despite the fact that the Green Party voted against it. And New Zealand First's opposition to this in terms of saying it's a bad deal, for the life of me, I can't see the logic in it. I can understand some of their reservations around the investor state, sir, parts of the bill, but I certainly can't understand how this is a bad deal. $4 million we give up to Korea, and we make $229 million overnight. Now, that to me is a pretty good deal. That's $225 million we end up ahead rather than behind, and that's before we're able to compete better with some of those other countries that have already got in and got those free trade agreements before us. So, sir, the deal is a good one. There is some reservations, there is some concern, and many of the people who came before the Select Committee, and I will say that we had a very good Select Committee process. Commend all members of the Select Committee and Mark Mitchell's chairing of it. And we asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to go back in reply to some of the reservations that we heard from submitters at least 3 times, to give us fulsome advice on what the issues, in response to the issues that were raised. I think that the investor state clauses that we have, and we have it in this Korea Free Trade Agreement. We insisted on having it in the Chinese Free Trade Agreement. And why did we insist? Because we were concerned that our companies trading in China might not get the legal representation that they would need in order to safeguard our interests. In the case of Korea, I don't think that's a really big issue. Certainly our legal framework is in the top 3 or 4 in the world. The Koreans are ranked in about the 12th or the 13th or 14th. Certainly a robust legal system, so we could do it through our domestic courts without having to resort to the ISDR. That, sir, I believe is unnecessary. However, the Koreans wanted it to go into their free trade agreement, and we agreed to it. New Zealand has never come before the courts there, sir, and I don't expect them to have to in the future either. Thank you.